Some people think of forgiveness as a moral obligation or a religious imperative, but I don't. I think it's counterproductive and actually impossible to guilt trip or spiritually coerce people into forgiving. Instead, I see forgiveness as a modality of releasing trauma from the body, and I see it as a practical bridge of consciousness that moves us towards our goals, whether those are financial goals, physical, lifestyle, or even romantic goals and visions that we hold for our future. That's why I chose to forgive things in my life that many other people considered impossible to forgive. I set out to intellectually and spiritually understand the purpose and application of forgiveness. I sensed that without this understanding, old trauma would forever operate at some level in my body. And when I took inventory of the kind of life that I wanted radiant health and heart expanding love and joyful self expression. Any degree of resentment or bitterness in my mind or residing in my body cells would make those goals impossible. So let's dive in to what might be the most powerful trauma release modality on this planet, the most powerful healing force available to us and freely available to us, which is forgiveness. I'm Lauren Geertsen, and welcome to the Truth Activist Podcast. This is where we dive into hidden history, secret agendas, and global awakening. And though we discuss some heavy topics, the focus always remains on empowerment and healing, because with enough truth, we can heal everything. I see forgiveness as a tool to elevate our consciousness, and it allows the harms that were done to us when we had a prior level of consciousness, it allows those harms to be released. It's allowing more independence, understanding, and empowerment to our perceptions. Greater empowerment is how we gain power over our circumstances. That's what I mean when I say we become more empowered. We have more ability to change the things outside of us and within ourselves that are causing us pain and trauma and limitation. Without more power to change those things, we stay stuck, looping in the same struggles and patterns. So that's what I mean when I say that forgiveness acts as a bridge of consciousness. It is a way that we can start opening our perspectives and seeing new choices available to us, seeing new ways we can have power over ourselves and our environment. At the core of this, at the core of any expansion of our consciousness, any new perception that we're reaching towards, is the willingness to be wrong, and the willingness to be wrong about some really basic things. Now, one of my governing mottos in life is the best thing I ever was wrong. And that's certainly true about resentments and perspectives that I held towards people who had hurt me in some really significant ways in my past. I was willing to entertain the thought, what if I'm wrong about how I'm seeing the situation? And just being willing even to entertain that thought was an important step towards major healing. In fact, healing things that other people consider impossible to heal. This is really what it boils down to for me. I've seen that in my own life. If I am willing to forgive the things that some other people consider impossible to forgive, what happens is it makes available to me healing that other people consider impossible to experience. Let's dive a little more into this concept of forgiveness is being willing to be wrong. So, where does resentment come from? Where does bitterness come from? I'm going to list some common thoughts and just see if any of these might resonate with you. There's the belief that a bad thing happened to us, right? If you are considering forgiving something, that's probably coming from a belief that a bad thing happened to you. Maybe there's the belief that it shouldn't have happened to you, that what happened was not okay, that the evil or abusive person shouldn't have gotten away from away with it, or that we face unfair or unjust circumstances as a result, or that our lives should be easier, but they are now made harder because of this bad thing that happened to us. On a mental level, forgiveness is the willingness to change and to release those beliefs. Now, that can seem so radical that it short circuits people's brain when they hear that. And you might be thinking, Lauren, are you saying that abuse or injustice is okay? And what I'm saying is that what happened to you is okay in the sense that it happened to you. What happened to me was okay in the sense that it happened to me. It's all in accordance with reality. And what I'm saying is that what happened to you should have happened to you because it happened. It is in accordance with reality. There's great power that comes with facing reality this way. All victimhood comes from a delusion that things shouldn't be the way they are. And there's no power there because we're not actually engaging with reality. We're engaging with a delusion that our little human pea brains could comprehend how reality should or shouldn't have happened to us. I found there's kind of a common entry-level philosophical question that people ask, and especially if they grow up in more of a intellectually void form of religious programming, and that question is, why do bad things happen to good people? This question says a lot about a person's worldview. This question stems from fundamentally a perspective of victimhood. And that's why I don't see this as an accurate question leading to any kind of useful answers. In my perspective, there are no bad things and there are no good people. There are things that happen to people. Circumstances happen to people, and we interpret and we use those circumstances according to the level of our wisdom. Or we use and interpret those circumstances to increase our wisdom and our empowerment. We use it as an initiation and an invitation to face reality instead of staying in our delusions about what should or shouldn't be in the past and what shouldn't and shouldn't have happened in the past. Here's an example of applying that framework. I once was bedridden with a life-threatening autoimmune disease at 18 years old, and you can bet at the time when I thought my life was going down the drain and I saw no future for myself, I thought that it was a very bad thing that was happening to me, a very unfair thing, that I was a good person that did not deserve to have this horrible thing happen to me. But then I learned how to heal this condition with nutrition and holistic medicine. In that experience, I learned the hidden truth about Big Pharma, the healing power of food, the healing alternatives that are available to us, and I became qualified through my own experience to help other people who were facing the same health struggles. I was able to show them new options that hadn't previously been on my radar. So the question is, was the illness I experienced a bad thing? Or was it a necessary ingredient to my empowerment and seeing what's been hidden from humanity and the tools we have at our hands to bring about what seems like miraculous healing? My definition of a hero is someone who is strong enough to help others become stronger. And the mind-boggling thing, I want you to chew on this, is that a victim and a hero are made from the exact same circumstances. And forgiveness is part of the mental bridge that takes someone from victimhood to heroism in their life. We can look at abuse, injustice, chronic illness, narcissistic abuse, poverty, being taken advantage of, theft, whatever the quote bad circumstance is. Those circumstances, some people blame as being the reason they're held back or they're suffering in life. And yet other people credit those challenging circumstances as the reason they made quantum leaps in their life and move forward in beautiful and powerful ways and became very strong people. I see all of those, quote, bad things as spiritual ingredients. If any of those things happen to you or other really challenging events, you might imagine putting those into a big cauldron. You might imagine your heart being the cauldron into which those circumstances, those ingredients are added. If those ingredients are met with the emotions of bitterness and resentment residing in your heart, then they start to mold and ferment. It's quite like having an imbalanced microbiome that can't digest food, right, in your gut. But think of that happening in your heart. You're putting these ingredients into your heart. It's not an environment that can digest the circumstances, uh, and you end up not being able to digest life. It's like you metaphorically and maybe sometimes literally end up with an inflamed and painful heart. But if you put those same circumstantial ingredients into your heart and they're met with love and courage and faith and fortitude, then you can alchemize those same circumstances into gold. Let me illustrate this with a story of my friend Elizabeth. So in 2021, her husband was fired from his job for not getting the bioweapon injection. We all remember that crazy phase of the world. And it absolutely was an illegal thing to happen. This was very unjust. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably aware of that. And they could have said, they had two older teenage kids at the time. And they could have said, oh, well, you just got to get the vaccine. We got to keep paying the mortgage. It's our only option. A lot of people did say that, but they didn't. What they did was they took the same circumstances that other people considered themselves victimized by, and they used it to catapult them into literally a different stratosphere of life experience. So what they did was her husband just walked away from his corporate job and said, okay, this is an initiation into something greater. It's going to take a lot of courage from all of us, but we're going to do it. We're going to create a life where we are independent from what's going on here. So they sold their house in the city. They bought a plot of land in a different state in the country, and they set about learning a whole new way of living. They started gardening, they established a rental property, and started working together as a family. I mean, just it transformed not only their financial life in a very positive way, but their physical well-being, because all of a sudden they're out from this corporate city lifestyle, and I watched them all physically transform. They grew stronger and tanner and just more vital and vibrant as human beings, just returning to the earth. And now it's been about 5 years later, and like I said, they are literally in a different stratosphere of financial well-being, of health, of lifestyle. And it's quite possible some people might look at where they are right now and think, oh, they're just lucky. It was positive circumstances lining up that brought them there. But the biggest factor that I saw in their life was the circumstance that other people considered a really bad thing. But instead of facing that circumstance with a sense of victimhood, they chose to face it with an immense amount of courage. And I think that's part of what established this quantum leap in their life that just continues, is they all established a new baseline for courage. All of them. Elizabeth, her husband, and their two kids who are now young adults. I have seen them all make decisions that come from this new baseline of courage. And it's transformative. I really see them as an archetype of a new earth family. They are making the impossible possible with this new baseline of courage that each of them hold. The moral of their story is that a hero and a victim are made from the exact same circumstances and the alchemical force that they chose to introduce into their life. This force that determines whether a person ends up a hero or a victim is not only courage, but forgiveness. They didn't move forward holding this bitterness and resentment about all this unjust thing that happened to them. They needed their emotional energy, they needed their minds free to start building their new life. So, forgiveness is this willingness to be wrong about our judgments and perspectives. They could have all held to this judgment that, oh, this thing that has happened to our family is a bad thing. Oh, dad lost his job because this totally unjust mandate is such a bad thing. But they don't operate with that mentality. They operate with the mentality of, we are so grateful for how circumstances lined up to give us a kick in the butt, to make a decision, to transform our lives. If you continue to hold the perspective that what happened to you is a bad thing, how are you ever supposed to use it for good in your life? I don't think you can. I think that is where it has to start. At least that's where it started for me. I could have looked at abuse that I experienced in different ways in my life and thought, oh, that's such a bad thing that happened to me. But I had some spiritual insight and awakenings on my path that helped me realize there is a higher order to what happened in my life that I don't understand. And I'm willing to release this belief that the abuse that happened to me was a bad thing. And I've shared some of those instances on this podcast and in my books, particularly the story that I'll share briefly again when I was in a relationship with a psychopath in my early 20s, this literally a evil wizard who practiced black magic and had sexually abused his students and clients for about 30 years in a big sexual abuse cover-up at the nutrition school I attended. And midway through that relationship or exploitationship, I was not yet aware of the level of abuse and gaslighting I had experienced. I didn't know about the cover-up yet. I didn't know who he really was. But I was starting to realize that this person who I loved, who I felt a soul love to, was hurting me and didn't seem to care. I had this moment of allowing that realization to wash over me, and the emotional pain that it uprooted within me was so intense that I just fell to my knees in my living room. I leaned up against the living room floor, and I decided to just let the emotional intensity overtake me. I closed my eyes, and I had an out-of-body experience. I floated out of my body into a soul realm, and I don't know how I knew this, but I knew I was in the presence of his soul, and I felt this question from my soul just rise up, and it was, why are you making this so hard for us? And his soul replied, Lauren, this is for your books. And suddenly I descended back into my body, and I opened my eyes, and I didn't know what to make of that. Logically, I could not comprehend that. I was writing about health and nutrition. I had no clue what this meant. But the soul memory, the soul understanding had woken up in me that there was something happening here to put me on my life path that I didn't fully understand. And if you've read my book, The Scorpion and the Lion, then you'll know what unfolded and how it certainly seemed divinely orchestrated, how things lined up, and how from that experience, I have been able to write books that help people recognize narcissistic and psychopathic dynamics and not only get free from them, but heal that pain fully. Here's another example of a hero and a victim being made from the same circumstances, and that if you're willing to have a mindset of empowerment and release this thought that what happened to me was a bad thing, that can put you on your life path in a profound way. My adopted grandma, who I will refer to as G, is a Black woman who grew up in Jim Crow, Alabama. And when people hear G's childhood, a very common response is, oh my gosh, that is the worst childhood I've ever heard of. How did you survive that? But G does not hold any level of resentment or grudges or victimhood about her past or the abuse she experienced or the people who were complicit or involved in her past. And she has no victimhood in her. Instead, she became a student of human consciousness at a very young age with really challenging things that were happening to her. She observed how people trap themselves with their own thinking. She studied the consequences of people's thoughts and beliefs and how that played out in their life. And because of those observations, she could remove the limitations and traps of consciousness in her own mind. She kind of reversed engineered the system. This is my take on how she found profound empowerment in really challenging circumstances. And now where she's at in her life, the people she grew up with who had the same upbringing or environment would consider it impossible that she's at where she's at. They blame their circumstances, which are shared with her past circumstances, as the reason they can't move forward in life or experience certain things in life. But she didn't operate from that level of thinking, and the results speak for themselves. So if you're on this path of learning how to forgive the impossible, because you sense that that's going to unlock some beautiful dreams and goals for yourself, then two things to repeat to yourself, two things that I certainly repeated to myself on this journey. The first one is the best thing I ever was wrong. If you think that something happened to you shouldn't have happened, if you think that what happened to you was a bad thing, be willing to be wrong about those judgments so that you can find the greater empowerment. And then the second thing to remind yourself is that a victim and a hero are made from the exact same circumstances. You may know from experience that trauma and abuse can absolutely manifest in chronic health challenges. And if you're on a journey of addressing the root emotional causes of chronic illness, I have a resource for you. Chronic Illness Liberation is my 25-day process to recognize and release the root emotional causes of persistent and chronic health challenges, whether that's autoimmune conditions, Lyme, chronic infections, cancer, anxiety, depression, or other mental health challenges. This 25-day process is complementary to whatever other modalities or approaches you are taking to your health challenges. While addressing the emotional root component of chronic health issues may not be the only thing that's required to experience healing, I found that it is a very big piece. And until and unless that emotional piece is addressed, chronic health symptoms tend to linger and even turn into mystery illnesses that just seem like they can't be touched by any other modality. So if you're in a place of feeling stuck and frustrated by chronic health issues, like you've tried everything and it's not working, it might be time to look at the deep emotional root causes. This transformative process takes just 15 minutes a day for 25 days, and you can get started now at chronicillnessliberation.com. For me, no discussion of forgiveness is complete without addressing the misguided concepts we may have around forgiveness, especially due to religious programming. You may know that my last book was Jesus Rewritten: How Christianity Changed His Life, Death, and Message. This is a deep dive into Christianity's hidden history, lost gospels, and theological plot holes. This is a deep dive into Christianity's hidden history, lost gospels, and theological plot holes. I share solid and mind-blowing historical attestation that what Jesus taught, including what Jesus taught about forgiveness and what his earliest followers believed, is very different, in fact, contradictory in many ways to modern Christian theology. Even if you didn't grow up religious, the Judeo-Christian worldview around forgiveness might have permeated your psyche. If you grew up in Western culture, it's really ingrained into our society. And unfortunately, this worldview does not offer a rational or theologically consistent concept of forgiveness. In fact, it offers a pretty warped concept of forgiveness and love that can impede people from truly experiencing forgiveness in their life so that they can walk across that bridge to heroism and empowerment. It might surprise some people to learn that Jesus taught a different message around forgiveness than what we find in Christian theology. To the best of my understanding of very solid historical sources, what Jesus taught about forgiveness is beautiful and it's liberating and it's spiritually accurate. And it is entirely different than what Christian theology teaches. I go in depth in this in my book, Jesus Rewritten. I provide the historical attestation because I know it sounds like I'm making a big claim here that what Jesus taught is fundamentally different than Christian theology. Well, if that raises some questions for you, I'd encourage you to look at the book, Jesus Rewritten. But for the sake of this podcast, I'm going to address what standard Christian theology teaches about forgiveness. Standard Christian theology goes like this. For God, quote, so loved the world that it needed a virgin human man sacrifice to forgive humanity of their sins. Sins that could otherwise be considered mistakes or learning actions and consequences. But no, these are, quote, sins that would send people to eternal torment forever. And without such a sacrifice, without this human virgin sacrifice trope, Christianity posits that humans are unworthy of spiritual solace and would suffer infinite torture in hell. And this is presented in Christian environments as the greatest love story ever. But this is not love. And it's absolutely not forgiveness. And it's absolutely not what Jesus historically taught. It is not love to require an innocent person to die for guilty people. That's not justice, and that's not forgiveness either. It's not love to require a blood sacrifice. It's not love to require the murder of an innocent person to atone for the death, the sins of guilty people. It's not love to send people to infinite punishment for finite sins. That's not forgiveness, and that's not justice either. Above all, it's not even possible for God to forgive people. Now, that sounds like a radical claim if you grew up in religious programming like I did. That would have short-circuited my brain if somebody had told me that. But if you believe that God is love, then God is the highest state of understanding, consciousness, and connection in the universe. The ultimate state of love cannot hold a state of unforgiveness in the first place. Those are contradictory experiences. Love is the ultimate state of understanding. It's knowing why we made the choices we made. It's the ultimate state of empowerment, which cannot be harmed by the choices another person makes. Love cannot be harmed by unloving action. It's like if you introduce darkness into the presence of light, the darkness dissolves. It holds no power in the presence of light. As people grow in love, as we humans raise our consciousness, then we grow in both understanding and empowerment. That's our process of forgiving others and forgiving ourselves. Can you think of an instance where this happened for you, where you decided to grow in wisdom and love, and what happened was that you gained an understanding that the person who hurt you was, you understood why they did what they did. And it wasn't about you, it was about where they were and how they were hurting. And you stop wishing harm on them and you wish them love because now you're closer to love. And because you're closer to love, because you've increased in wisdom, the harms that they inflicted on you start to dissolve because you're more empowered, right? Now, this is a journey that we humans have to go on because we are not born with ultimate loving consciousness. So the process of forgiveness is a human experience we go through to have minds more like divinity. But that's not a process that ultimate divinity ever has to go through. And to suggest that God needs blood sacrifice to atone is, this is a strong word, but I'm going to use it. It's absolutely a barbaric superstition. Again, in my book, I go in depth in this concept. It came from superstition in ancient Judaism and in Greco-Roman paganism, and that's how it got integrated into the Christian religion. It has absolutely nothing to do with what Jesus taught, and actually, historical attestation shows that Jesus completely rejected this blood sacrifice superstition concept entirely. Again, if any of that piques your interest, you can dive into all of that and more in my book, Jesus Rewritten. You'll find that on Amazon or jesusrewritten.com. And now I want to end on an excerpt from that book, an excerpt discussing what forgiveness is and why people often subconsciously shy away from it and are deeply disturbed by it. The choice to heal your past, no matter who caused past damage, is forgiveness. To forgive first requires intellectually entertaining the possibility that your life need not be determined by the past, but by how much you choose to heal the past. Consider it in these terms. When we naively integrate lies and false beliefs into our psyches, they constitute a form of poison entering our bodies. The poison creates a certain energetic resonance, like a magnetic charge. That resonance attracts similarly poisoned and poisonous environments. Or, if you prefer a non-metaphysical description, you might instead consider this dynamic in terms of psychological patterns. If you were raised by a narcissist, for example, your psyche is distorted in a way that produces codependent behavior. Your mind fits like a puzzle piece with narcissistic rhetoric. Either way, forgiveness releases the poison from your being, shifting your energetic resonance and reshaping your psyche. Your inner, quote, puzzle piece shapeshifts and no longer clicks into unhealthy dynamics and environments. For this reason, when you change your inner charge or psyche, there's no way to hold onto the old frequency of your life. That's why, deep down, many people are terrified of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a willingness to shed illusion. You lose the poison that has become a part of your identity. In turn, you also lose the life that has accumulated around that identity. Forgiveness promises to set you free from the toxic chains of your life. But what if you cherish those chains? You may have come to conflate your deepest identity with ways of being, thinking, and relating that might be energetically shed or transformed through forgiveness. Those things may include your current physical appearance, paycheck, lifestyle, cars, clothes, sexuality, relationships, reputation, or spiritual beliefs. What if you don't want to risk losing everything that's familiar to you? Well, to be blunt, then you're going to be stuck. You're going to repeat the same relationship, health, or financial problems. You'll feel like you've, quote, tried everything, but can't get out of the rut. Forgiveness offers breakthrough opportunities by shifting your internal environment in such a way that your external circumstances must change. Along with the fear of shedding our familiar lives, there's another common resistance to forgiveness. It can sound like this. If I forgive the terrible thing someone did to me or my loved ones, if I forgive the atrocious lies told to us, it's like saying the harm they did was okay. I've frequently heard coaches and therapists deflect this concern by saying, "Oh no, that's not true. You're just choosing to move on with your life, not saying that what they did was okay." If you never believed that line, it's understandable because it is total gaslighting and your spirit knows it. When you forgive, you are indeed saying that what they did was okay. What you're actually saying is, okay, I accept the reality of my past and what was done to me. I'm choosing to accept that as a lesson in love, because through love, I can be okay in the present moment. Forgiveness raises our consciousness to such a degree that the harms previously experienced are released. It allows greater love to flow into our being, which heals what we once considered irreparable damage. To experience such transformation, however, you must first accept the okayness of what happened to you. Remember that bad things don't happen to good people. Things happen to people. Your level of spiritual development determines whether you use the things that happened for healing or use them to stay stuck. Forgiveness requires us to say, I'm willing to see this situation and the person who hurt me with more love. I'm willing to open myself to the possibility that I can use what happened to me for transformation. I may not know how to do that yet, but I am willing to learn. No wonder we often resist forgiving due to fear of losing control. Love creates a world we can't control. Forgiveness uproots how we've previously understood a situation for our whole lives. Gone is the neat little world of believers versus heathens, Democrats versus Republicans, beautiful versus ugly, us versus them. Our world shatters because our crusty old perceptions can't contain the new surge of love. Celebrate this. For when your world shatters, it gives you room to expand. Before forgiveness, we explain our suffering through blame. We point fingers and say, I am this way because of what was done to me. They ruined my childhood, corrupted my country, bombed my village, enslaved my ancestors, poisoned my water, handicapped my body, destroyed my business, killed my child. They broke me. If you allow that ending to your story, however, the pain never ends. Consider the words of Eric Thomas, a motivational speaker. He spent his teenage years in the inner city trenches of Detroit, dropped out of high school, and found himself homeless. During that period of his life, he blamed his parents and his rough upbringing. In an interview recorded later in his life, he reflected on this rock bottom moment. He said, when I look back, it was all blaming. Everything was about this person or that person. I never even realized I was where I was because of who I was. And I was actually getting the physical manifestations of my thoughts, my feelings, and my emotions. I was creating these circumstances. I thought my mom created it. I thought my father created it. In the interview, he goes on to explain that help and guidance were offered to him through various avenues, but due to his thoughts and victim mentality at the time, he pushed away these resources that could have helped him. Does this sound extreme for a teenager from a broken family to take full ownership of his circumstances as something he was creating through his emotions and thoughts? It is indeed extreme. But it's also the kind of attitude that allows people to overcome extreme obstacles and achieve extreme success, as Eric later did. This is different from simply blame shifting, from removing the blame for your struggles from other people and turning the blame onto yourself. The key, instead, is to raise your consciousness from blame into the higher ground of self-responsibility. That sounds like saying something like this. Once I suffered because of what others did to me. Now I'm choosing to recognize my suffering as a result of the psychological patterns and emotional trauma I'm holding within me, and the familiar life I'm holding around me. I'm willing to surrender my entire identity and sense of security to the uncontrollable force of love. I'm willing to lose everything familiar to me to release this pain. I'm willing to become someone my old self wouldn't recognize. I will leave you with this question. Are you willing to forgive the harm that was done to you? But under that question lies another one, a bigger one. And that question is, are you willing to love enough to enter a world you don't control? Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Truth Activist Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or a like wherever you're listening. I appreciate the support. Stay tuned for the next episode, and in the meantime, here's your invitation to love so much that you enter a whole new world.